Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. John stood at the front of the room, the weight of every eye on him feeling heavier than a 1,000-pound anchor. The people around him whispered in hushed tones, their voices barely audible yet cutting through the air like knives. His pulse raced, pounding in his chest with such force that it felt like his heart might burst. His fingers, trembling uncontrollably, gripped the edges of the podium. But no matter how hard he tried to steady himself, it felt like he was spiraling, falling fast into a bottomless pit. "Isn't it enough?" The words spilled from his mouth before he could stop them, raw and desperate. Instantly, silence filled the room. It wasn't just the silence of 100 pairs of eyes watching him. No, it was something much deeper, something that left a gnawing feeling in his stomach. The moment stretched out, suffocating, unbearable. He wanted to shrink into the floor, to vanish, but he couldn't move. His entire body felt locked in place as the crowd stared at him, waiting for his next move. John's mind raced, but no thought seemed to land long enough to make sense of it. It all felt surreal. The last few minutes had been a blur of confusion, anger, and humiliation. He had been so sure of himself, so confident in the work he had poured his heart and soul into over the last decade. But now, standing in front of these people, in the heart of his own company, he felt smaller than he had ever felt in his life. The laughter echoed in his ears like an unrelenting storm, sharp and bitter. He could see their faces, the way they looked at him with a mix of amusement and disdain. He could feel the judgment in their eyes, burning into him, as if they had been waiting for this moment his entire career. Every word, every glance, felt like a stab to his chest. He had worked so hard, fought so many battles, to get to this point. Yet, now, it seemed like everything was slipping away in a heartbeat. John had spent years building this company from the ground up, starting with nothing but a dream. He had fought through failures, faced losses, and endured sleepless nights, all for this moment, for this room full of people who were supposed to respect him. But here he stood, the man who had created it all, humiliated in front of them. It was almost as if he no longer existed to them, just another cog in the machine, expendable and easily replaced. He tried to speak again, but his throat felt dry, like he was choking on the weight of his own words. The room had become a blur, the faces of his colleagues morphing into a sea of unfamiliar, hostile eyes. There was no sympathy here, no compassion, only judgment. He had been betrayed, not by one person, but by the entire room. And now, they were watching him, waiting for him to break, to fall apart. His fingers clenched the podium so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He could feel the sweat dripping down his back, soaking his shirt. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he thought he might faint. Suddenly, as if the world had shifted on its axis, the door at the back of the room slammed open with a force that made everyone turn in unison. John didn't have to look to know who had entered. The sharp, confident click of dress shoes on the polished floor told him everything he needed to know. Tyler. His son. Tyler had always been the one person in his life who was able to bring him some sense of peace. But not today. Today, everything was different. John could feel the weight of the room's eyes on his son as Tyler walked toward him with the kind of confidence that John himself had once possessed. The same confidence that had built this empire. But now, it felt like Tyler's presence was an assault, a reminder of everything John had lost. Tyler was dressed impeccably in a dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie that probably cost more than a month's salary for most of the people in the room. His hair was neatly combed back, and his sharp, calculating eyes scanned the room with a cold, focused gaze. John couldn't help but notice how much his son had changed. Gone was the boy who had once looked up to him with admiration and trust. In his place was a man who walked with the arrogance of someone who already had everything. Tyler didn't pause for a greeting, didn't acknowledge the crowd. He simply walked straight to the front of the room and stood beside his father. For a moment, the entire room held its breath, unsure of what was happening. The whispers started, low, almost reverent, sweeping across the room. No one had expected this. Tyler wasn't supposed to be here, not today. He had always been the golden child, the heir apparent to the empire John had built. But this was different. Today, his presence was a mystery in itself. John tried to say something, to plead, to explain, but his voice caught in his throat. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to say. What could he say? How could he explain what had just happened, the humiliation he had just suffered? Nothing made sense. Nothing seemed right. Without a word, Tyler turned to face the room. His voice rang out, calm and clear, but carrying an edge of authority that sent a shiver down John's spine. "Enough," Tyler said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The single word was enough to silence the entire room. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone was waiting for the next move, unsure of what Tyler would do. But no one had any idea how far he was willing to go. John watched in a mixture of disbelief and growing fear as Tyler reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. For a moment, the room was still. And then, with one smooth motion, Tyler pulled out a check. No, not just any check, but a large one. It was the kind of check that would make anyone's heart race with anticipation. But it wasn't the check itself that stunned everyone. No, it was the number written on it. The number that made every jaw in the room drop. $10 million. The gasp that followed was immediate. The air seemed to grow thicker, heavier. The murmurs started, but this time, they weren't filled with laughter. They were filled with confusion, awe, and a growing sense of fear. No one knew what was happening, but everyone understood that something had just shifted in a way no one could predict. Tyler didn't look at the check. He didn't need to. He just placed it on the table with a casual flick of his wrist, his eyes never leaving his father's face. John felt the ground beneath him shift. His body was frozen, his mind racing in every direction. The number on that check, the amount of money, it was beyond anything he could comprehend. He had never seen a sum so large in his entire life. But there was something else, something more disturbing, that John couldn't put into words. The way Tyler looked at him. It wasn't with the admiration or respect he had once seen in his eyes. No, this was something colder, something calculated. It was as if Tyler was sending a message. A message John couldn't understand, but knew he had to decode. Tyler didn't say another word. He didn't need to. He simply turned on his heel and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing as he left. And just like that, he was gone. The room was silent for what felt like an eternity. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were on the check, the staggering figure that lay in front of them, as if they were waiting for something to happen. John stood there, paralyzed. The weight of the check seemed to press down on him, suffocating him. He could hear the murmurs starting again, but they felt distant, as if they were coming from somewhere far away. The questions started. What did this mean? Why had Tyler done this? Was this some kind of power play, a way to show that he was now in control? But John couldn't answer any of those questions. His mind was too consumed with one single thought: what had just happened? What was Tyler trying to prove? And, most frightening of all, how far was his son willing to go to take control of the company they had built together? The room was still buzzing with questions, but John didn't care. His world had just changed, and he had no idea how he was going to handle what came next. The worst part? He wasn't sure if he wanted to find out. The room had barely settled when John finally spoke, his voice cracking, barely above a whisper. "What the hell was that, Tyler?" His words hung in the air, the question coming out not as an accusation, but as a cry for understanding. John's mind spun wildly, trying to make sense of what had just happened. His son, Tyler, had stepped into the room like a whirlwind, leaving behind an icy storm of confusion and uncertainty. That check, that impossibly large check, sat on the table in front of him, mocking him in its sheer size. He reached for it slowly, his hand trembling as if the very weight of the paper would crush him. He could hardly believe it was real, yet there it was, in black and white, a number that no man could ignore. $10 million. But it wasn't just the money. It was the fact that his son, the person who had always admired him, had treated him with nothing short of contempt. Tyler had walked in with a purpose, slapping down that check as though it was the answer to everything. But the question still lingered in the air. What did this mean? Why had Tyler chosen this moment, this humiliation, to make his move? John's thoughts spiraled. He had always known that Tyler was different. When he had been a boy, Tyler had been full of hope, eager to follow in his footsteps. The bond between them had been built on shared dreams, a sense of loyalty that seemed unbreakable. But that bond had fractured somewhere along the way. It wasn't just that Tyler had grown distant, it was that Tyler had changed in ways John couldn't quite understand. The years of hard work, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, all of it had been shared with Tyler. Or so John had thought. Tyler had always been the future, the one who would carry on the legacy of everything John had built. But now, as he stared at the check, John couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had worked for was slipping through his fingers. John stood there, his hand hovering over the check, before slowly pulling it back. His mind was racing, yet nothing made sense. The thought of what Tyler's actions meant kept gnawing at him. How could a son do this to his father? How could Tyler, the one person who should have stood by him, do something so publicly humiliating? Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence, and it was not his own. Well, isn't this just perfect? It was Claire, his longtime assistant. She had been with him for years, her loyalty unwavering, or so he had believed. But now, standing there in the doorway, she wore an expression he couldn't quite read. Her lips were pressed into a tight line, her arms crossed, her gaze sharp as she looked from the check to John. "What do you mean?" John asked, his voice hoarse. "You can't honestly tell me you didn't see this coming," Claire said, stepping into the room, her eyes narrowing. "I've watched the way you've treated him for years, John. He's always been on the sidelines, never getting the recognition he deserves. You think it's all just business, don't you? But for Tyler, it's never been about the company. It's been about you." John stared at her, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "What are you talking about? You didn't see it, did you?" Claire's tone was low, almost mournful. "The way you've pushed him away, all the years of neglect, the times you prioritized work over your family. He's always been second place, John. And now? Now he's had enough. He's showing you that he's not just your son. He's not some pawn in your game." John swallowed hard. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on the company, on building his empire, that he had missed the cracks in his relationship with his son. Tyler had always been there, but had he truly been there? Had he been just another part of John's plan, or was he someone who had been overlooked, someone who had quietly suffered all these years? "I never meant to. I never knew," John whispered, more to himself than to Claire. "You never knew, because you never looked," she replied quietly. "Tyler's never been the kind of person to complain, but that doesn't mean he hasn't been hurt. You're so focused on the business that you've missed the personal cost. And now, he's telling you, without words, exactly what he thinks of your legacy." John's stomach twisted as her words sank in. He had always seen himself as a provider, someone who had given his family everything they needed. But what had he sacrificed along the way? Was Tyler's rebellion a direct result of his choices? Could he have been a better father, a better person? The sound of footsteps approaching pulled John out of his thoughts. He turned to see his wife, Emily, walking into the room, her face pale. She looked between him and the check, the tension in her eyes growing by the second. What happened? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. Why is Tyler? He left, John interrupted, his voice raw. He left, Emily. He left, and I don't know why. I don't know what's going on anymore. Emily's eyes softened for a moment before hardening again. You don't know why? You've been blind for years, John. Tyler's not a child anymore. You've pushed him too far. You've made him feel like he was never good enough. And now, look what's happened. John closed his eyes, the weight of their words crashing down on him. He had spent so much of his life building something for his family, but now it felt like he had forgotten to build the most important thing, their trust. How had he let things get so out of hand? I didn't know, John said again, his voice cracking with the weight of realization. I didn't know. I thought I was doing what was best for him, for all of us. But you never asked him, did you? Claire's voice was sharp. You never asked Tyler what he wanted, what he needed. You assumed you knew, and that's where you failed. Emily stepped closer to John, her face softening as she reached out and placed a hand on his arm. We both did. We both let him slip away. And now, we have to fix it. We have to do something before we lose him for good. John's eyes filled with tears, but he quickly wiped them away, trying to steady his breath. What can I do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. How can I fix this? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Claire took a deep breath and stepped back, crossing her arms. I don't know, John. But what I do know is that you can't just sit here and wait for Tyler to come to you. You have to go after him. And you better be prepared for what you find. Because this isn't just about a business anymore. John stared at the check on the table again, his mind racing with what Claire had just said. His son was no longer the boy he had known. Tyler was a man, and he was no longer willing to accept being overlooked, being treated as less than what he was. John had thought he had the world figured out, that he could control everything. But now, everything felt beyond his grasp. You're right, John said finally, his voice resolute. I have to fix this. I have to make things right. But as he stood there, a sinking feeling crept over him. He had no idea where to begin. No idea how to fix something that had been broken for so long. And no idea what Tyler was truly capable of now. The door to the room suddenly opened again, and John's heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, expecting to see his son. But it wasn't Tyler. It was someone else. Someone who could change everything. John barely registered the door opening again, but when he turned, the sight that met him felt like the air had been knocked from his lungs. Standing in the doorway wasn't just anyone. It was an old face. A familiar face, but one that John had not seen in years. Dad, the man said, his voice gruff, carrying a heavy weight. John's heart skipped a beat. He blinked twice, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. He stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the man before him. He looked the same, tall, broad-shouldered, a weathered face marked with the years that had passed. But there was something different about him. Something colder. David, John's voice trailed off, barely a whisper. His throat tightened as if the very name carried an unbearable weight. David was John's older brother. The one who had disappeared years ago without a word. The one who left without explanation, leaving a hole in the family that John had never quite been able to fill. It had been over a decade since David left. John had been consumed by work, by the company, by the constant struggle to stay afloat, while David had walked away from it all, disappearing into the shadows of his own life. No one knew where he had gone or why he had left, but his absence had haunted John ever since. David, what the hell are you doing here? John finally managed to ask, his voice edged with disbelief. I'm here because I need to talk to you, David replied, his eyes hard but tinged with something else, something John couldn't place. John took a step forward, his body still in shock. You disappeared for 10 years, and now you show up, what, just like that? David didn't flinch. His eyes remained steady, unwavering, and cold. It's not just for me, John. It's about Tyler. The mention of his son's name brought John back to the present, jolting him with a fresh wave of anxiety. His chest tightened, and his mind raced. What did David know about Tyler? How could he possibly be involved in this? David stepped further into the room, his boots clicking softly against the floor. The air seemed to thicken with each step he took. We need to talk about your son. You've let things go too far. This mess you found yourself in. It's not just about your company. It's about your family. Your legacy. And it's falling apart. John shook his head, trying to process his words. I don't understand, he said, his voice growing frantic. I'm trying to fix this, David. I'm trying to fix everything, but Tyler, he won't listen to me. David's eyes softened, but only slightly. He stopped a few feet from John and stood there for a moment, assessing him, as if he were seeing through him, into a past that John had long buried. You think it's just about Tyler, don't you? David asked, his voice low. But it's not. You've been blind to everything. To your family, to the choices you've made. To what really matters. John took a step back, confused. What are you talking about? You think I don't know what's at stake here? You think I don't care about my son? David's expression darkened. I'm not here to accuse you, John. I'm here because you're running out of time. Tyler, he's not the only one who's been hurt. You've been living in a bubble, chasing something that doesn't exist anymore. You've spent your life building an empire, but you've lost everything that truly mattered along the way. John felt the sting of his brother's words, but he didn't want to believe them. How could he? For years, he had sacrificed everything to provide for his family. His success had been hard-won. His legacy was built on blood, sweat, and tears. He had done it all for them. For Tyler. But now, the questions lingered, doubts that had never been there before. Had he really done it for them? Or had he just been fooling himself? Why are you here, David? John asked, his voice steadier now. He needed answers, but his head was spinning. David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone else was listening. He then stepped closer to John, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Tyler's not the one you need to worry about, he said, his eyes narrowing. It's your company. It's everything you've built. You've been so focused on maintaining control, you've missed something else, something crucial. John felt a chill wash over him, a creeping sensation that something wasn't right. He stared at his brother, waiting for him to continue. You're not the only one who's been playing this game, John, David said, his voice darkening. There's someone else. Someone much closer than you think. John's mind raced. Who? What was David talking about? Who are you talking about? John demanded, his heart pounding in his chest. David took a deep breath, his gaze intense. It's someone who's been hiding in plain sight. Someone who's been manipulating the entire situation from the shadows. And if you don't figure it out soon, it's going to cost you everything. John's stomach turned. This was too much. He couldn't keep up. Tyler, the check, the sudden appearance of David, now this? Someone else? The idea of a hidden force pulling strings behind the scenes was too much for him to grasp. Who is it, David? He asked again, his voice more urgent now. Who's behind this? David's eyes shifted toward the table, where the check lay, untouched. He seemed to hesitate, as if weighing whether or not to reveal the truth. Finally, he spoke. Claire, David said softly. John's breath caught in his throat. Claire? His assistant? The woman who had been with him through thick and thin, who had never once shown anything but loyalty? It didn't make sense. How could it be her? No, John said firmly, shaking his head. You're wrong. Claire would never. I wish I could say you were right, David cut him off, his voice low. But I've seen the signs. She's been feeding information to someone. Someone outside this company. And now they've got their hands on your son, John. They've been using Tyler to get to you. John's mind reeled. He had trusted Claire. She had been his right hand, his confidant. And now, David was suggesting she was the one behind it all? The thought made his stomach churn. No, John said again, more forcefully this time. You're lying. You have to be. David sighed, his face hardening. You don't want to believe it, I know. But it's true. And I can prove it. John felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. Every instinct in his body told him this couldn't be real. But David had never been the kind of man to make things up, especially when it came to matters like this. If anything, he had always been brutally honest, even when it hurt. But this was different. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was something that cut deeper, something more dangerous. The idea that Claire had been working against him all along, manipulating him, using Tyler. John couldn't wrap his mind around it. What do you want me to do? John asked, his voice barely a whisper. David paused, looking at his brother with an unreadable expression. You have to confront her, John. You need to find out the truth before it's too late. If you don't, everything you've worked for will crumble. And you'll lose Tyler forever. John's heart sank. He couldn't afford to lose everything. Not now. Not when the stakes were higher than ever. I'll find her, John said, his voice firm, his determination returning. I'll find out what's really going on. But as he turned to leave the room, something inside him whispered that he was walking straight into a trap. John had never felt so lost in his entire life. The weight of the past few days, the shocking revelations, and the looming sense of betrayal pressed down on him like an unrelenting storm. His mind raced, each new piece of the puzzle making the picture more complex and more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. The check. Tyler. David's reappearance. And now, Claire, the one person he had trusted above all others, was somehow at the center of it all. But no matter how much he tried to deny it, he couldn't escape the truth. David had spoken with certainty. And there was only one way to find out if it was all true: confront Claire. He had spent the entire night thinking about what he would say. Every scenario ran through his mind, her reactions, the way she might try to talk her way out of it. But no amount of preparation could prepare him for what was about to happen. The truth was too powerful, and John was about to be pulled into its depths. John's eyes moved over to the door of the office. Claire would be arriving any minute now. He had asked her to come in early, giving him time to prepare. But in truth, he didn't know what he was preparing for. His body felt tense, and his mind was a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, fear, anger, and the constant thrum of uncertainty. He tried to steady himself, pacing the office. His hands clenched and unclenched, his thoughts circling back to the warning David had given him: find her before it's too late. He had to know. He had to face the truth. It was the only way forward. The sound of the door opening broke his train of thought, and for a brief second, his heart skipped a beat. Claire entered, her usual bright demeanor dimmed slightly, but she still carried herself with the same confidence that had always impressed him. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice light, but John could hear the hesitation beneath her words. She knew something was off. She had to. John didn't greet her right away. He stood across from his desk, studying her. He had always admired Claire's sharp mind, her loyalty, and her unwavering commitment to the company. But now, none of that mattered. Now, she was a mystery, a puzzle that had to be solved, no matter the cost. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of tension. "We need to talk." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she tilted her head. "Of course, Mr. Carter. What's going on? You seem tense." John clenched his jaw. This was it. No more games. No more hiding. "Sit down," he said, his tone firm. Claire hesitated but then took a seat across from him, her eyes flicking around the office before meeting his gaze again. "What's this about?" "You know exactly what this is about," John said, leaning forward. "I know what you've been doing, Claire. I know everything." Her eyes flashed with something, panic, guilt, or maybe surprise. It was hard to tell. But John could see it. The cracks were beginning to form. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice a little too calm. John shook his head. "You've been working with someone, haven't you? Someone outside the company. Feeding them information. Using Tyler to get to me. I don't know how, but I know it's true." Claire's face went pale, and for a split second, John thought she might break. But then she blinked, and just like that, the mask was back in place. "You've been talking to David, haven't you?" she asked, her voice cold now. John's heart skipped. "How do you know about David?" Claire didn't answer. Instead, she rose from her chair, walking slowly across the room, her back to him. She was calculating, composing herself. The shift in her demeanor made John's pulse quicken. "I'm guessing you're not happy with him showing up after all these years," she said, her voice soft but dripping with something dangerous. "But you're not angry at him, are you? You're angry at yourself." John stood frozen. She was right. He wasn't angry at David. Not anymore. He was angry at himself for not seeing the truth sooner. For trusting the wrong people. For overlooking the cracks that had always been there. "Claire," he said, his voice low. "What is all of this? Why? Why would you do this?" She didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath, her eyes focused on something far off, something beyond the walls of the office. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling just slightly. "Because you were never going to change, John. You were never going to see the damage you caused. You were too blinded by your own success, your own empire, to notice how much you hurt people." John's mind reeled as her words landed, each one cutting deeper than the last. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice rising now, his patience wearing thin. "I gave you everything. I trusted you." She turned to face him, her face hard. "And that's the problem. You always thought you were doing things for the good of everyone else, but it was never about us, John. It was about you. You never asked me what I needed. You never asked Tyler what he needed. And now look where we are." John's breath caught in his throat. This was the truth, wasn't it? The truth he had been too afraid to face all these years. "You're not the only one who's been hurt," Claire continued, her voice steady now. "You thought Tyler was the problem. You thought your son's rebellion was the issue. But you were too busy chasing your dream to notice that the dream had already started to crumble. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about family. It was about trust." John felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had built everything, but had he really built anything of value? Had he ever built trust? Had he ever truly built a family? "But why Tyler?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why use him?" Claire's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time in the conversation, John saw the humanity in her. "Because Tyler was always the one who was going to inherit everything, John. And when you started treating him like he was just a pawn in your game, I knew he had to see the truth for himself. He had to wake up, just like you." John closed his eyes, the reality of it all crashing down on him. He had failed his son. He had failed Claire, too. In the pursuit of success, he had destroyed everything that truly mattered. The people who had always been there for him, the people who had trusted him, he had let them slip through his fingers. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I've made so many mistakes. I've ruined everything." Claire didn't say anything. She simply nodded, her face unreadable. The silence between them felt heavy, oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter now. "There's still time, John. You can still fix this. But you have to make a choice. Do you want to save your company? Or do you want to save your family?" John stood there, paralyzed by the weight of her words. For the first time in years, he felt truly lost. He had always thought he had all the answers. But now, everything seemed so clear, and yet so out of reach. I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know how to fix it." "You start by putting your family first," Claire said softly. "The company will crumble if you don't. But if you don't change your priorities, you'll lose everything, your son, your legacy, everything." And with that, Claire turned and walked out of the office, leaving John standing there, alone with the truth. He was standing at a crossroads now. His whole life had led him to this moment, and what he did next would decide everything. He could continue down the path of pride, success, and empire building. Or he could choose to rebuild what truly mattered. John knew what he had to do. He grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed Tyler's number. It rang once. Twice. And then, the line clicked. Tyler's voice came through, low and unsure. "Hello?" "Tyler," John said, his voice breaking. "I need you. I need to talk to you. Please, come home."